everyone. Once again, I'm Pastor Vlad from Vision Church in Bromley, and I'm here with my dear friend and spiritual leader and mentor. There's so many things I could say about him, Pastor Paul Hodgson, with a vast experience in ministry, and we are looking at the topic of ministers and their relationships. So until now, we have talked about a minister and his or her relationship with God, with him or herself, with a spouse, with children, and the friendships that a minister is involved in, both in the church and outside. Today, I'm really excited to talk about the relationship that a minister has with other church leaders and ministers. So, Pastor Paul, thank you once again for being here with us. Here's my first question. What kind of people should a minister surround himself or herself with in local church leadership?
Well, hopefully people you can trust, but also people who are really loyal to you, people who believe in your ministry, as it were, people who respect you, people who are there to support you. To be honest, the biggest problems I ever had in 40 years of ministry were with a group of elders. There were times when I actually dreaded the elders meeting. And part of the problem, the reason for that is that although the Bible says that in the multitude of counselors there is safety, I think that some elders don't regard themselves as counselors. Wow. They want, everybody's trying to be the leader, as it were, or think they could do better than you or whatever. One of the things that we did do, which I think was very important from a very early point, was we decided that we would never, as a group of elders, I counted myself among them, we would never do anything in the church or introduce a new idea or start something unless everybody on the eldership was in agreement. So it was extremely important that every single person had come to that point where they knew exactly what we were talking about, exactly what we're going to do or change, and every single person was at peace about it. Equally, at the same time, if one person wasn't at peace about it, all the rest of us would wait. And we would go away and we would pray about it and we would bring the subject up again, however many times we needed to do it. It could well be that the Lord was speaking to us through that one person, and we might say, right, we'll never do that, or we'll do it in a different way. So a lot of that is like coming to a place of respect for one another, of trusting the Holy Spirit in one another, of listening to God together and listening to each other and listening to God through each other. So that was a huge, great safety net, and it solved a lot of issues and a lot of problems. So, I think that's important.
Is it intentional that you're saying that if that one leadership member is not at peace, is it intentional you're saying is not at peace rather than saying doesn't like the idea?
Well, again, I think what we've got to do at a very early stage is to say, look, we're all in this together. We should all want the same thing. We all want to please God. We all want to serve his people. We all want the best for Jesus. Okay? So we shouldn't be fighting about anything, should we? But what we need to do, there's all these different points of view. So, we need to consider those different points of view and so on.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, if we are genuinely all wanting the best for Jesus, and we're all wanting God's will,
Yeah.
then we've got to come to a place where we are in agreement. And we shouldn't be fighting about this.
Yeah.
And again, I think that if we have that motive that we just want, it's not for me, it's not for my ego, it's for the best way forward, and we're listening to God, and we want to please Him. That if that is our motivation, it saves a lot of problems.
Yeah. So it's basically about putting the greater good and God's desires for the church above potentially personal preferences, right? So we approach those conversations not as an individual who prefers certain things, but rather as a part of a group called by God to minister to the church. So what is best for the church, rather than what color carpet do I like, for example, right? Or silly things like this sometimes. So would you want to put the greater good of the church aligned with God's desire, and then that's the piece we're looking for. Is this good for the church at large, and does it honor God? And if the answer is yes, we go with it, basically, right? Yeah.
To be honest, I think we make church very complicated. And I think the closer that we can get to the New Testament ethos of the church,
which is what?
The better. Well, I still think that the way that they met in New Testament times, in terms of meeting in homes, in terms of a group of elders leading that group, in terms of everybody participating. Each one has a psalm, a hymn, a spiritual song, an exhortation, a tongue, an interpretation, and so on. That openness. Now, I know that we can't go back to, the first century. So we've got to apply those principles to the 21st century. And hopefully we can do that in a big congregation, and that big congregation also being divided into smaller groups as well, where possibly more of a New Testament way of doing things can happen. But, in lots of churches that do have small groups, all they do in the small group is to have a Bible study or a prayer time or a fellowship time, whereas I think we need to look again at, what did they do in the New Testament, and let those spiritual gifts happen, and let there be that openness within the group to be led by the Spirit, and to exercise spiritual gifts, and to exhort one another, and to bring a testimony, bring a psalm, bring a hymn, and so on.
I think this ties in with the question I was having, which is basically, there are some church leaders nowadays who behave more like a CEO of a company, rather than, a shepherd or one among many who are called to lead the church. And the mentality tends to be that because you are the CEO of the church of Christ, right? He is the head anyway. But if a minister develops that attitude of being a CEO, then it feels like everyone else around him or her work for him or work for her. How do you feel about that, especially in light of what you were saying about the New Testament church? Is there anything close to that kind of attitude in the New Testament of someone like Peter or James behaving like a CEO and everyone does their bidding?
Well, of course, you got the Galatians thing with Paul and Peter. where Paul does challenge Peter. And I think that every, let's call it CEO of a church, a modern church, needs to have people around him who will challenge him.
Yeah.
And he needs to give permission to them to say, why? Why do you want to do that? Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
And I think, again, we've all seen a lot of ministries crash because that person at the top didn't have people that he would listen to, didn't have people to say, you're stupid, you're being stupid, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
But that person's got to be willing for them to do that.
Yeah.
And like you, I have a real problem with this mentality. So I think it's this whole thing of big churches. I've seen some big churches work wonderfully well. For example, my best example of that is Jack Hayford and the Church on the Way in Van Nuys, California. And, he's in heaven now, and he truly was a great man of God. Yeah. And he truly was a pastor, and he truly was a teacher, and he truly was the pastor leader of that church. But he also had lots of very, very good people around him who took all kinds of things off of his shoulders. At one point he was doing his television ministry. He was also the principal of the Bible college and the pastor of Church on the Way. Different points in his ministry, doing all these things. But it was because he knew how to delegate, and he delegated to people who were really trusted and really, really did a great job. Yeah. And who also would say to Jack, why?
Yes. I think one of the things I hear in what you're saying is that one way in which a minister can sort of develop that inclusivity in leadership is to give people the permission to ask why. And as long as the why comes from a heart that is heart that loves the minister, that wants the best for him or her and the church at large, then as ministers we shouldn't be afraid of giving people the opportunity and permission to ask why. But I think even that it needs to be initiated by the minister. Or if someone else initiates this, the minister must be okay with it. So for example, as a church, so for me personally, one of the things, and you know this to be true in my relation with you, but also with our church leaders, who I really, really love, is I'm giving you permission to speak into my life and to ask the hard questions. And I think if I have the trust, which I do, that the question comes from a heart that is filled with love and care, then it's good to have those conversations. And when you were saying initially that we need to surround ourselves with people that are loyal, it comes from that kind of loyalty that is not blind but caring. To say, I love you and I want the best for you and for the church. I'm a bit unsure about this. Can you help me understand where you're coming from? And I think this also helps the minister and the church or the ministry they're leading in long term, because surrounding ourselves with godly people who love us help us see our blind spots. Because we don't know what we don't know.
True.
We don't know what we don't see. I think this is the beauty. And connected to this question, if I may ask, how can a minister be accountable to other church leaders?
Within his own church? Well, I think in two ways. First of all, in a meeting of the elders or the ministers, who whatever the setup is, but also preferably, even before that, individually, just between him and the other person. They need to feel able to come to him and say, Pastor, or whatever his title is, can we have a quick chat? And I think that should be encouraged.
Yeah.
It's better to have private conversations and deal with something straight away and settle it privately without involving everybody else.
Yes.
You know, sometimes, these bigger meetings of the whole board or the whole eldership, however many elders they may be, when there's a moment of conflict, which is only literally between the two of you, and everybody else is part of that, that's horrible. That can be horrible.
Yeah. There is actually a biblical principle, right, which can be applied in this situation of if you have something against your brother or sister, go to them one-on-one. So maybe one of the things that I hear you saying is before bringing a concern you might have in the leadership meeting, make sure you speak one-on-one with the minister or whoever is involved before that meeting. So at the meeting, you're not sort of casting a shadow over the entire meeting just because you may have a potential concern about one individual in that room. And I think this is also the idea of loving someone. I love you, and I'm not going to put you in a situation where you're caught offside, right? But rather, let's talk before we meet, because we want together as a church leadership team to be united in listening to God and walking in the plan that God has for the church, right? This is a good one, Paul.
Indeed, yes. Yeah.
Linked to that, if I may go again on this, there is a tendency sometimes, because of our flesh and our human nature, to either for the church leader to be domineering, or for the board of leaders, whatever they look like, to be domineering over the church leader. Or the opposite of that is that there may be a church leader or a minister who is quite passive and relaxed, not necessarily someone who takes initiative and makes decisions, or a board of church leaders who are more like, if I can say, pencil pushers, right? So we want to, generally speaking, make sure we're neither in one extreme or the other, where it's not only the minister making decisions, neither is only the board of leaders making decisions, but together they sort of come together for the good of the church. So my question is that when we look at these two extremes, what is sort of a balanced way in approaching church leadership where we're neither domineering nor being dominated by one or the other?
Well, I think it, first of all, goes back to the original appointment of those people. So obviously, some people inherit a group of elders, or they inherit a church board, and you have to work with that. So that can be difficult. So you might need to establish some principles and things like we've already spoken about over a period of time. But hopefully, if you're able to appoint new elders, it is done in a very prayerful way. I mean, for example, we did like a questionnaire for potential elders, and so before they agreed to being elders, they had to think through all the different issues that we felt as the present leadership were vital that they agreed with, or that they were, understood, and so on. So that was very helpful to, the scripture says, lay hands suddenly on no man. So we should be very slow in a way to finally appoint somebody. And even then, there's no guarantees. And so life happens, and, there are moments when there's disagreements and there's problems, and we have to talk about it, we have to pray about it, and we have to forgive.
So one of the things that I sort of was thinking about years ago is that if I serve or I'm part of a church, whether as a member or on staff, and there is a concern I have about the main minister who doesn't necessarily have a group of people that ask him the why questions, right? That he can sort of be accountable to. What happens then? Who does a church member or staff go to?
I think a church member should be able to go to any elder, and that should be understood amongst the elders and with the pastor. That they should be able to go to any elder and express whatever they want to express. The elder hopefully can deal with that and bring about a good conclusion, a prayerful conclusion, but it should also tell the pastor about it.
Yeah.
So I think that the pastor should give permission to the other elders and to the whole church that they can go to anybody who's in the leadership to ask a question or express a concern or make a suggestion. You know, very often people in the church come up with wonderful ideas.
Yeah.
And however, if they come up with a wonderful idea, the first question is, okay, are you going to help to do it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't expect all of us to take it on.
Yeah. Would you say it's important for a minister to also have someone that is not necessarily part of the church leadership that he or she is accountable to, but so to another minister of sorts? In a way, similarly to an extent to how I am with you as well.
Yes, I think it's good to have somebody outside of the local church that you're leading.
Yeah.
I don't know why we're talking so much about just churches here, but yeah, I think that it would be good.
Yeah.
It is good to have any number of people that you feel I can share this with. And it may be different people, different problems with different people that you share.
Yeah. So as a final question, which we sort of referred to a bit, what would you say is the closest thing to a biblical church, a biblical model for church leadership that we can sort of have?
Church leadership is just truly multiple elders.
Yeah, a plurality of leaders.
Yeah, plurality. And within that, recognizing any of those elders who are evangelists or who are pastoral or who are teachers, okay? Recognizing their gifts and giving them space to fulfill those gifts. Obviously, in a much really big church, it's the opposite way round. The church might appoint an evangelist to be on the team, the ministry team. But in that case, depending again on the size of the church, the evangelist would be one of the elders. However, if it's a really big church, so for example, Church on the Way in California, they had their ministers team and they had their eldership team. So it was two different groups. And so the ministers are answerable to the elders and the elders are answerable to the ministers. And they work together, but they also work separately. But that's because it was so big.
Yeah, it varies. So basically it's about plurality of leadership in which both parties, if you're the minister and the leaders, are loyal to one another, love one another, treat each other with forgiveness and grace when need be, and have conversations that really support the other one rather than exposing them in a sort of public meeting, even if it is just 4 or 5 elders, right?
Yeah, and just going back to scriptural examples, I mean, we always think about the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Paul did this, and the Apostle Paul did that. But we must never forget that Paul always worked in a team.
Yes, yes.
That he always had an apostolic team.
Mm.
And he did send them off, like Paul and Timothy and Titus were sent off to do different things. And he was never possessive of that team either.
Yeah.
But he never really functioned alone.
Yeah. That's powerful. Thank you, Paul. Thank you again. I know we went a bit in more detail than we planned, but I think it's important for both ministers and those involved in ministry to understand the dynamics of a relationship that a minister has with other church leaders and ministers. So thank you for this today.
Thank you.
Bless you.